Hello, good evening. So, just a quick walkthrough of the platform. I won't go into so many details today in this video. I'll keep it very short, brief, but explain the overview of IntelliThink. So, the philosophy behind IntelliThink is that when we started, we saw lots of people. If you just imagine the landscape right now, you see a lot of people are using generative AI products that are coming out every day in their day-to-day life to solve problems. Now, that problem is to streamline processes. Let's say you don't have to go to Word document and generate a document. You can just copy and paste in ChatGPT and tell it what you want, and it creates it for you, and so on and so forth. So we see a lot of people are adopting it into their day-to-day tasks, but we see less of companies adopting actual, these new technologies into their processes. Now, talking about the insurance company, for example, although underwriting is manual, we see very few insurance companies, trying to solve these challenges with generative AI and the latest advancements in AI. And IntelliThink basically enables that, facilitates a series of tools that you can create products that you can basically streamline enterprise or companies' processes. Now, talking about the platform, we have, you see a few options on the left-hand side. We'll be going to develop a product. That's where we spend the majority of the time. Got three functionalities there: block editor, workflow management, and custom training. Uh, we'll need at least one to develop something, or we might need all three depending on how complex the task is. Now, this block editor basically visualizes things in form of a block, which is really easy. You don't need to understand the underlying infrastructure, the structure. You don't need to know anything. You just drag and drop, configure, deploy. Now, when it comes to deployment, obviously you have, or generally when you want to use this platform, before we start drag and dropping, I need to mention that there are two ways of using it. Now, you can connect your own workspace, which is Google Cloud, AWS, whatever it is, and then everything, all these processes, deployments, everything is done on your own infrastructure. Or you can use IntelliThink as it comes. If you don't have a setup already, if you don't have a cloud computing, then you use IntelliThink, and IntelliThink will basically, you borrow hardware and resources from IntelliThink during the testing process, building process, and at the end, instead of deploying it on your own infrastructure, you just take the Docker Hub. So if it's connected to your infrastructure, it's easier. You just have a one-click deployment, goes to production, API, and everything. If not, then you have the file at the end, a Docker image to take and play around with and deploy it wherever you want. In this example, we are using IntelliThink as a service, a hybrid environment. So, without further ado, let's look into the options, and we'll see few models here. These are the models: open source, from Google Gemini to OpenAI, even OpenAI, which is not open source. We have Llama, we have Mistral, and so on and so forth. Now, what we want to build, we'll start with building something very simple. And that's one of the, actually, a company reached out to us and they said they try to build something uh, that retrieves their product list. So they have a product list. It's in the, well, the testing, at least what they wanted us to test for them was, is a PDF file. I still have it. And in that PDF file, there is a list of products. So in that product list, then they want to have like a query or a chat interface where people can chat and say, can you recommend me? And so on and so forth. So for that, we'll need a model. We'll use OpenAI. Let's build it. We'll drop it here. And we'll need a RAG. So we'll need a knowledge base updater. And every module you drop here, very simple, but there is a whole system behind this block. Now, if I go to workflow editor, for example, you'll see that there is a there is more than just a block. There is lots of series of steps, and in every step there is a lot of processes. But we'll come back to workflow later time. For now, a very simple retrieval mechanism from a list, and we can even prompt it. So the prompting was basically formatting the output. We tried it, and it was nice because the answers, once we add this prompt, the answers are consistent throughout uh, the product recommendation. But it doesn't matter, we can just leave it out. It's just the nice thing I was gonna show. So we are configuring this model with 1 hour of GPU. We say we borrow it from IntelliThink because we don't have a setup separately. And then we say we have this knowledge base updater. We call it knowledge base. And today our knowledge base is basically a list PDF files. Now, description is for the router engine. So by default, we are using a router engine where the queries are routed. Now we have basically one RAG now, but we could have multiple different connectors and multiple different RAGs and multiple different modules. So this description is for the router to know which module to pick or where to process the data. If you where which module to go and process the query if you have multiple different things, and that's the default setup. Obviously, there is a way to break that default setup. We'll talk about it in workflow, but let's say we say this is a list of products and product catalog. Since we have only one RAG connected, we can instruct it to say this or answer all questions by relying on this knowledge base, because there is no other module, and we'll keep it simple. And then we have a prompt template where I have it here already. So basically it just says, format it, like add the product image, etc. And then we call it a product demo, prod demo. We save it. Once you save it, you go to product list. There you go. So product list basically is deployment list that you can manage your deployments in here. Now we have this one, which we can say deploy. If again your cloud is connected, once you deploy, it deploys in your infrastructure. For now, we borrow the GPU from IntelliThink. It deploys on IntelliThink servers. At the end, we have an option to migrate it, but we'll leave it for the deployment to complete, and then we'll come back to it. We can perhaps look at the other areas of the platform. Now, you might be saying, okay, we have this thing, we have this workflow, and then we talked about or we have these modules, but then we talked about having enterprise solutions. So you might be saying, okay, that insurance company might have a risk factor in their process because they can't rely on GPT or Mistral AI or whatever large language model is to do certain predictions. Now, for that reason, we can basically create a custom module, one of these blocks that you drag and drop, and out of a supervised machine learning model. Now, if you go, and I'll show you what it is. If you go to custom training, you'll see a page where you can add your data, whatever that data is. It gives you some sample of how the structure is, what the column names are, and so on. You can do a series of pre-processing on it if you want to in this visual editor. So you just click on the columns, you do whatever you want to do, but we have this data is clean, so we don't want to kind of go down the rabbit hole of trying to pre-process. It's already pre-processed. Now, if you go back to data, model training, if you pick the data, we can say, I want AutoML to train a model for me, then to target column to say whether as an individual is a smoker or not, yes or no, true or false. And I don't know which one is good feature selection, so I tell the AutoML, you find the best features for me to train this model. So AutoML, we try a combination of different features, different hyperparameters, and so on, finds the best features to predict and basically trains a model, whether it's regression or classification. So now we'll wait. It's going to take a few seconds of minutes, depending on how large the data set is. But now what we have a model that gets a series of input and gives an output of yes or no. Smoker, yes or no, true or false. And obviously, this is just an example. Could be any data set and training on any target column that you want. But this particular one is just tells you uh, this particular person is a smoker or not. Now, this is giving us a 96% accuracy rate, which is fantastic. We've got a model management section, so you can manage the versioning, you can inference the model in isolation, and so on. But again, for this example, we'll just go back to block editor. So this model here now should appear, hopefully, yes, in this section. Now it's a block. You can drag and drop and create a new pipeline with it, whatever that might be. Then we have data connectors like SQL, for example. So we'll drop SQL as well. And then we'll drop the RAG as well. So now we have a stack with 3 modules. Could be anything, but let's stick with 3 modules. And I want to show you why we need workflow. So you might be saying, okay, you have this router engine that automatically decides what goes where, but it's kind of like a um, when it decides which query should be served where, then it becomes in isolation. It's either the model or a SQL connector or the RAG. What if I have a particular flow and I want this application to work in a particular manner? So let's say the user query is something, and based on that something, we need to go to knowledge base, which is RAG, retrieve the relevant information out of that RAG, and then based on that information, we'll have to go and retrieve relevant data. We need to format it, push that data into the model, and get an output. Now, for this complex task, we had to train a model, and then we go to workflow. So the default workflow we have here is a default workflow is always created by the system, just so it makes it easier. But we say if we go back, if we go zoom in, we have a series of nodes. So every module has its own node, and they are all interconnected. And this is the default. That's we just deployed the default one. But if we want it different, the same scenario that we just talked, we go to the bridge. We say drag and drop a bridge, and then what we say is that we want the query to go to RAG, finish the RAG, and I know RAG synthesize is the last node of that or last step within that RAG system. Once you have that output, give it to bridge, and the bridge, please pass it to SQL module. And I know initialize workflow is the first node of SQL. Now, I click OK, and what happens here is that now I have the RAG module that completes a task, completes the query, return a result, goes to the bridge, and from bridge goes to the SQL. Now, from SQL, then it retrieves the relevant data. Now we want to say once you retrieved the relevant data from the last node, which is the output node of the SQL module, go to the first node of uh, the first node of the model that we trained, and we say confirm. Now you have the same thing here. So the bridge will then bridge it. So obviously you have a lot of different options here. You can add conditions, you can format them. By the way, the data formatting is automatically done because traditional supervised machine learning, you need a predefined input that goes into the model and get a predefined output. So input A, output B. And for this matter, that kind of formatting, the underlying formatting is always handled by our systems. But when I say formatting, if you want to do some sort of thing like or get an output and do X and Y before you pass it, or whatever that process or condition is, or whatever you want to do is absolutely doable. So that becomes a custom workflow, but then the system, the process is going to be the same. Now you click on deploy. Obviously, I don't want to configure these things. We could, but perhaps that's a better idea if we get together in an innovation session and do it. But if we go back, the same thing is going to happen. You deploy it, it goes to deployment list, it goes through the process of uh, deployment. Now this is initializing, so that means it's at the last step. We'll just give it a minute and then we'll do some testing. So as you can see, the status is deployed and we have something called the deployment API generated here. So if we click on it and then we open a new tab, this gives us an API documentation. So the API is auto-generated for every deployment where you can inference the model. So this API, you can pass it to your backend developer, front-end developer, whatever it is, to then utilize the model. Within that, you get a response within that pipeline, within that their product. Now, if we go to Playground, we have a Gradio interface for testing. We have a chat customer support. Obviously, it's just a graphical user interface mockup that we have because it's easier for some people to see it in different mockups, but ideally should be tested in something like a Gradio. It's just easier. So let's say, can you recommend me some for A so far? So the prompt that we added is just to organize the picture, then put the price, then put the product links and give some further information that you should visit the web page. Or we say, can you, I am looking for a sofa, for a blue sofa. What do you have available? Got this sofa available. I am looking for a sofa. No, um, no more than wide. See if they have anything. But anyway, the point is that the system is now retrieving and formatting and doing the job. Now, what happens here is that if it's your cloud, you run the deployment, you just leave it there. It's not going to ask you for GPU borrowing and the prompt that we went through. So what happens is that you just leave it on, you pass this API, you are done. Or if you are in this case like now, you are working with IntelliThink, you go to migrate, you click on push to Docker Hub, and it pushes the image to your Docker Hub. So then you go get your image, build it, run the container on the cloud, and that's it. Now, mm, obviously, I have a section. There is somewhere in settings where you need to set up your Docker, and then you just one click push. So that's just a quick overview of IntelliThink. There is a lot of other features and things that go within it, but I'd be happy to explain in more details. For now, I'll leave the video here. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you for your time, and bye.